Grace isn't guiding you, it's hurting you. And the tarnished never once stopped to ask the difference. Out in the lands between, this soft golden light just appears. And it feels warm. It feels like someone left the light on for you. It promises a crown, a throne. The title of Elden Lord whispered across a fog-choked sea to people who've had nothing for a very long time. So they come. No questions asked. They cross into a world of broken kings and dead gods, completely convinced this light is bringing them home, that it's personal, that it chose them. It did choose them. That's the problem. Who made that choice is where the lore gets uncomfortable. Maybe it was Marika, the god who controls grace, who divested Godfrey of his when there were no worthy enemies left to fight, or allowed it to leave him, depending on who you believe. Maybe it was the greater will, using its remaining instruments to rebuild what the shattering broke. The game's opening doesn't tell you. From Software used passive voice on purpose. But here's what that ambiguity actually means. Whether Marika was acting against the greater will, or the greater will was cleaning up after Marika. Either way, the tarnished were never told. They were just handed the leash. And Grace is that leash. A finely built system that traces a path straight through the most dangerous things in the lands between. Shard bearers. Most of them demigods. The pilgrimage Grace maps out runs directly through all of them. The sites of grace along that road are real sanctuaries. As long as you reach them clean, you recover, you breathe, but they're just small enough to remind you the road continues. Enough relief to keep you moving, not rest, resumption. The promise of power doesn't free you, it moves you. The cruelest part isn't that they were used, it's that the hope was real. It just wasn't theirs. This world doesn't kill the tarnished randomly. It kills them methodically. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. What we're doing in this chapter isn't tragedy tourism. We're not here to feel bad for people who made bad choices in a hard world. We're here to document a process, a repeatable, almost clinical system for taking a person apart. Because the breakdowns aren't random. They're categories, 3 main cases, 3 distinct methods of collapse. Vyke, a knight who chased the Elden Ring further than almost anyone alive and came back as something that sets people on fire. Rogier, a sorcerer who found out something he wasn't supposed to know and then just stopped. Not dramatically, quietly. Knowledge, in the wrong hands, doesn't enlighten, it hollows. Diallos, a man who spent his entire arc measuring himself against the standard he was born into. Where it ends is not what you'd expect. And around them, the smaller cases, Edgar at Castle Morn, where duty curdled into grief and then into something uglier. D, whose rigid faith in the Golden Order left him no room to question the world that would ultimately kill him. The round table holds itself, emptying out as the game continues. NPCs leaving, dying, disappearing, until the silence becomes its own kind of evidence. Every single one of them a different wound. Every single one of them the same surgeon. The question isn't whether the system broke these people. The question is whether it was ever designed to do anything else. Vyke came closer to the Elden Ring than almost any tarnished alive, and that's exactly what destroyed him. Proximity wasn't a reward, it was the trap. By every measure, Vyke was the one. Round Table Knight, war spear in hand. A will that didn't bend. He had the strength, the conviction, the singular focus, become Elden Lord, stand before the Erdtree, claim what grace promised. And he got further than almost anyone, which is when things got complicated. Because to claim the throne, his finger maiden would have to be sacrificed, used as kindling for the ritual. And Vyke, for whatever reason, couldn't do it. Wouldn't. Whether that was ambition, refusing to pay the price, or something that looked a lot more like love. The lore won't tell you. The game specifically asks the question and then leaves it open. What it doesn't leave open is what happened next. He went to the 3 fingers. And whether he completed the ritual or the frenzied flame simply took what it could reach through the armor he never removed. He came out the other side of it changed. Whatever he was trying to preserve by going down there, her life, his conscience, some version of himself he could still recognize, didn't survive the trade. What came back wore his armor, scorched from the inside out, hunting tarnished who approached the church of inhibition, whether because it suppressed what he carried or because something inside it was worth guarding. The lore doesn't say. Maybe Vyke doesn't either. His strength became the fuel. His conviction became the accelerant. The system didn't break Vyke by making him weak. It broke him by letting him be strong enough to make an impossible choice, and then showing him what that choice actually cost. He made the most human choice in the entire game. The lands between made sure he'd never be human again. Vyke didn't lose because he kept failing. He lost because he was about to win. And the system knew exactly what to do with that. No other Tarnished came closer to the throne. That's not interpretation. The lore is explicit about it. Which means when everything went wrong, it went wrong at the finish line. He knew what claiming the throne required. He couldn't do it. Maybe it was love. Maybe something outside him got there first. The lore won't tell you which one. Either way, what comes next is the same. That's where Shabriri found him. Shabriri was the most reviled man in all history, a spirit whose original form the frenzied flame had long since consumed. He didn't manufacture Vyke's weakness. He found it. And he offered a third option, a way to spare the maiden without surrendering the dream. The crack in Vyke's armor wasn't pride. It was the one human thing he was still carrying, and Shabriri knew exactly how to use it. This is what I think the architecture of that failure looks like, even if the lore won't fully confirm it. The system didn't need to turn Vyke into something monstrous. It just needed to find the one virtue that could be weaponized and hand him something that looked like a solution. The lands between doesn't break people by making them weak. It finds what they love and builds a door out of it. Shabriri didn't corrupt Vyke. He just knocked on the right door. Rogier didn't go looking for power. He went looking for answers. The lands between punished him for it anyway. Turns out, knowing too much and knowing too little feel exactly the same from the inside. Vyke's story ends in fire. Rogier's ends in a chair. He was a sorcerer and a scholar, never mentions the throne, not hungry for combat. He wanted to understand how things worked. The hidden histories, the forgotten conspiracies, the machinery underneath the world. That was his whole thing. And then he found the face. In the depths of Stormvale Castle, Rogier found something that wore a murdered demigod's face. An offshoot of Godwyn the Golden, the first demigod in all recorded history to be slain, still spreading death blight into everything around it. He came back with half his body suffused with death, black thorns pushing through his legs, sitting in a chair at the round table hold, waiting for answers that might explain what was happening to him. He kept researching the Black Knives conspiracy, the Night of the Black Knives. The question of who could have stolen a fragment of the Rune of Death, and whether Ronnie was the one who ordered it done. And he got there. He figured it out. Ronnie's role, the curse mark, the shape of the whole conspiracy. He assembled the truth. He just couldn't do anything with it. That's the specific cruelty of what happened to Rogier. The lands between doesn't always withhold its secrets. Sometimes it gives them to you complete and then makes sure you're too broken to act on them. His mind didn't shatter. It frayed, slowly, thread by thread, until the man who solved the mystery couldn't lift himself out of the chair to do anything about it. He didn't burn out. He just dimmed. His voice got quieter, his thoughts got looser, and eventually he faded, still holding a truth the world made sure he'd never get to use. The system didn't break Rogier's mind. It just made sure his mind could never rest. The lands between didn't lie to Rogier. It told him the truth and made sure the truth was poisoned. That's a much harder thing to defend against. A mind that needs things to make sense is the most dangerous kind of mind to bring to the lands between. Because the lands between looks like a puzzle. Intricate, solvable, begging to be figured out. For someone like Rogier, that's not a warning, that's an invitation. But the puzzle is designed to have no solution. The pieces don't fit because they were never cut from the same reality. And with Rogier, the chase was the trap. The knowledge and the contamination came packaged together. You already know that. What's worth talking about is what he did when he figured it out. He didn't despair, he adapted. When presented with evidence of the conspiracy, his response wasn't grief. It was this.
Half my body has been suffused with death. I'm certain it will help me see.
He's using his own death as a research tool. That's not weakness. That's the saddest kind of brilliant. And then there's the isolation. The round table hold is full of people. But what Rogier knows, that a demigod ordered the Night of Black Knives, that the Golden Order was propped up by silence, isn't something you say out loud in a room full of warriors and a hunter of the dead. There's no one in that building equipped to hear it. Rogier is completely alone. So he works with what he has. He coordinates with Fia behind the scenes. He sends the player to pull every thread he can no longer reach himself. He uses a stranger as his legs, his hands, his messenger. Even at the very end, he could feel it coming.
Lately, I feel I'm on the precipice of falling into a deep, fathomless slumber.
And still, the last thing he left behind was a letter written in a trembling hand, passing on one final piece of information he didn't want to go unrecorded. Even the hand was still moving. What the system took from Rogier wasn't his drive. It was his agency. The cage wasn't one that made him stop wanting to leave. It was one that kept shrinking his reach until the only move left was to hand the key to someone else and hope. The tragedy isn't that Rogier gave up, it's that he never did. And it didn't matter. Diallos didn't fail because the lands between broke him. He failed because it never had to. He arrived already, carrying the fracture. The world just handed him a mirror. Here's the thing about Juno Hoslow, Diallos' older brother, and the furthest thing from a villain. He wasn't cold, he wasn't cruel, he didn't look down on his little brother. Diallos' mask tells you that he saw Juno as stern, self-possessed, a man of few words whose achievements made him seem out of reach. But the Hoslow's helm tells you the other side. Diallos' inability to act meant Juno inherited the Hoslow legacy without resistance, and that freedom is what allowed him to shower his little brother with adoration. The game splits their relationship across two items that can never be worn at the same time. One brother looking up, unable to reach, the other reaching down, unable to land. Juno didn't take anything. He received everything by default. And then he turned around and loved Diallos anyway. That's the specific kind of wound that never heals, because there's no villain to blame, no injustice to point at. Just a quiet verdict that nobody meant as a condemnation, which makes it impossible to fight. Diallos arrived at the lands between with that verdict already in his bones. The mask he wears says everything. A replica of his brother's helm, just without the twin tails. The shape of authority, none of the weight. He was still yearning for the day he'd tell the tale of House Hoslow in blood, still waiting, already here. He introduced himself at the round table hold like this.
Just call me Diallos. The honor of one's house holds little import in these lands.
He threw away the one credential he had going for him before anyone could take it. Preemption is its own kind of armor. It just doesn't protect anything. Then, Lanya died. Lanya wasn't just a servant. She'd been with him since childhood. She followed him all the way to the lands between. When he found her body, what he lost wasn't staff. It was the one person who had stayed. And here's the thing. Diallos doesn't say, I lost someone I loved. He says,
They laid hands upon my servant Lanya, and I refused to let the insult stand. The tale of House Hoslow is told in blood.
He translates personal grief into the language of house honor, the very framework that already judged him, and wears it like a borrowed coat, hoping this time it might finally fit. It's the only vocabulary he has for something this large. He had a vow. He had a real reason. This was the moment the yearning was supposed to become action. But the lands between has a specific weapon for someone like Diallos. It doesn't need to attack him. It just needs to put him in the same room as the player. Every demigod defeated, every great rune claimed. Each one arrives as quiet, accumulated data confirming what Diallos has always been told about himself. The Haslow's helm already named what separated him from his brother, his inability to commit to action. The lands between is a world that only counts what you do. Standing still while others act isn't neutrality. It's a verdict. He stood over Lanya's body. He swore the oath. He said every word that needed to be said. And then he waited for someone else to act on them. The most devastating thing the player ever did to Diallos wasn't defeating him. It was succeeding in front of him. The cruelest move the Lands Between ever made on Diallos wasn't letting him fail. It was telling him, right when he had nothing left, that he was a champion. After Lanya's death, Diallos had the location of the recusants. He had the vow. He had a real reason to finally act. And then the people who killed Lanya invited him to join them. He said yes. His reasoning is right there in his own words.
According to Lady Tanith, I've got the stuff of champions.
Champion. That's the word that had been living in him since childhood, written into his mask before he ever left home. The system didn't manufacture his weakness. It just knew its name and spoke directly into it. So he dirtied his hands, killed for Lady Tanith's purposes, called his grief over Lanya's simple naivete, told himself she would understand. He translated the most personal loss of his life into an obstacle small enough to step over on the way to becoming what the Lands Between had always promised he could be. And then the illusion collapsed.
It's just as my noble brother says. I'm a complete fool. I can't believe I thought I could become a champion.
In the moment of total collapse, it's Juno's verdict that returns. Not Lady Tanith's, not the Lands Between's, his brother's. The judgment that existed before any of this is the one that survives it. He left Volcano Manor with nothing. And then he found Jarberg. Not as a champion, not as an avenger, just as someone who had run out of roads and ended up in a village of clay jars. The jar folk didn't need a Haslo heir. They just needed someone to stay. And Diallos, who had spent every chapter of his life reaching past himself towards something he wasn't, found a role that fit exactly what he was.
Even a fool like me can look after some simple jars.
Then the poachers came. And when they did, he invoked the Haslo motto one final time, not as a costume, not wrapped around borrowed grief, in genuine defense of people he had chosen. The phrase that had always been a performance finally fit the moment. He won the fight. He died from his wounds anyway. His first words at the end were about the jar folk. If told he'd succeeded, he says,
This fool proved his worth in the end.
He died with the word fool in his mouth. He used it as evidence. He died a hero. He knew it at the very end, and still couldn't say it clean. The Lands Between doesn't break people by accident. That's the first thing the pattern demands you conclude. One person could be a coincidence. 2 is suggestive. 3 is a blueprint. Vyke, Rogier, Diallos. 3 different people, 3 completely different points of entry, 3 completely different ways of falling apart. Same result. The opening narration doesn't announce the Tarnished as heroes. It announces them as the dead. Still persistent, still useful, called back not for their sake, but for a job that needed doing. The system first created the wound. Then it offered itself as the cure. It doesn't apply the same pressure to everyone. It finds the crack and leans on it. Vyke's was devotion. Rogier's was curiosity. Diallos's was doubt. It arrived to find them already installed. 3 cracks. The system found all of them. And it doesn't rule by force. It rules by myth. Grace tells the Tarnished they're chosen. A person who has staked their identity on a system's promise has already handed that system the wheel. The body recovers. The soul keeps a running tab. Sir Gideon Ofnir, the all-knowing, stood at the end of everything he'd learned and offered his conclusion about what Marika actually wanted for the Tarnished.
Queen Marika has high hopes for us. that we continue to struggle onto eternity.
Not that we succeed, not that we become, that we continue to struggle. There are outliers, characters who took what the system gave them and redirected it towards something it didn't design for. They exist. They're real. But they are the exception. And the exception doesn't disprove the equation. It defines the cost of escaping it. For most, the loop holds. The promise of grace is a doorway. Countless souls walk through. Few return whole. The harder question isn't why so many tarnished broke. It's what we call the ones who didn't. And whether hero is the right word or just the system's word for whoever survived long enough to serve its purpose. The measuring stick was built by the same system that produced Vyke's ashes, Rogier's chair, and Diallos' last word. Grace brought you here. Ask yourself who that was for.